Today is National STEM/Steam Day. I'm not talking about Steam as in the PC games, right? I am talking about STEM and Steam. It is full steam ahead because November 8th is a day meant to inspire kids to explore and pursue their interests in science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Art is a new one. That's where we get the STEAM, not STEM. So I have to be all 100% behind a day that is all about expanding the horizons of our kids out there as they look into science and engineering, technology, and so forth. So, pretty cool day. I'm celebrating National STEM/Steam Day. Hopefully you are too. Anyway, besides that, do you want to mention the Daily Dope is in the air. Howdy, gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at The Daily Dope, presented by TheGamingGang.com, of which I happen to be the Grand Poobah. Yes, the founder and editor-in-chief. So, this is episode 194 of The Daily Dope. So, if this is your first time popping in to join me, this is a very casual show. This is a live stream. Pretty much talk about tabletop games. Sometimes I do unboxings, sometimes I do reviews. Today, I am actually going to page through the Player's Handbook for the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I know folks out there are probably thinking, Jeff, are you crazy? That's been out forever. Forever. I'm not crazy because I have actually never done a video review for the core books for the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I did a video review way back in the day when I was living in Mishawaka, Indiana, and I did the starter box, but I have never actually done video reviews for the core books. So I thought, hey, it's Thursday. I love doing RPGs. I love sharing physical books, too. I don't mind doing reviews on PDFs. It's just not as entertaining or, I don't know, in my opinion, as exciting as actually showing off a full book right up there in your hands. Yes, gotta love it. So, do you want to point out, because this is a live stream, chat is available on YouTube. So, if you have a question or a comment, just want to say hello, or maybe you want to know something a little more in depth about the Player's Handbook, by all means, chime in and I will respond. Chat is not on screen. It's one of the ways that I do kind of keep some of the stranger comments at bay. So, also want to point out, I am down here in the Duct Tape Studios once again. The weather is changing in the Chicago area. It is getting cooler, that is for sure. And I do want to point out, I've got the kitties down here with me. So, Smokey and Pinky are both down here in the Duct Tape Studios. And Smokey's kind of sacked out. She was on my lap for a little bit before the show started, but she's going off to sleep. Pinky, on the other hand, is roaming around, and she seems to be kind of vocal today. I'm not talking to you, by the way. So, just want to point out, we might hear Pinky chiming in from time to time as well. So, got the news. I got a little bit of news today, not a ton of news today. But also want to mention that if you are not a fan of me sharing the tabletop gaming news of the day, look in the show notes. There are timestamps. You can skip right ahead. You do not have to watch the news. I don't know why people get upset about this, but some people just don't like it. All right, so let's jump on into the aforementioned news, because I mentioned yesterday that Stronghold Games had a lot of different games coming out, both before the end of the year and in the first quarter of next year. And I mentioned I'm going to talk about a few of them as we go along, not all of them in one day. So there is one that is on the horizon, looks pretty interesting. It's a really well-known designer. Though I got to be honest, my experience with his designs has not been great. But here's the dope on Futuropia. I believe that's how it's pronounced. In Futuropia, Friedemann Fries's big utopian economic game for 1 to 4 optimizers Players live in a future utopian society that possesses desirable lifestyle qualities for all of its citizens. Too bad this is not today's reality. In this utopian society, we all will work much less. Our robots can do nearly everything already. There's no need for great envy. It's simply about equality, justice, and the fair allocation of the complete and still necessary work, which then gives us all more leisure time. Success means we will have time for the activities we like the most: fishing, farming, fencing, flying. A lot of F's there. As well as gaming, building, painting, traveling, composing, and more. If somebody wants to work more than needed, they should do that. This is not about the freedom. I should say this is about the freedom. Duh. So let us rethink this. Joblessness is not a disgrace. It is the new goal. We are members of a team striving to realize this utopian ideal. We try to develop completely self-sustaining homes that function as efficiently as possible. They must generate enough food and energy to allow the residents the greatest possible freedom, thus leisure time. The more people in our development who no longer need to work, the closer we are to reaching our goal. The player who builds the best development will win the game, and their development will become reality. In the game, that is. Futuropia is a luck-free economic game. To ensure you always encounter new challenges, we offer multiple game setup variations, which create a variety of gameplay situations, ensuring new experiences and replayability. The solo game offers you an option to learn the mechanisms and processes of Futuropia before you play it with other players. See our hopeful future in Futuropia! Futuropia is for 1 to 4 players, ages 12 and up, plays in around 90 minutes, and will carry an MSRP of $69.95 when it arrives tentatively in January. This does sound interesting, I will admit. Although I have to say, reality-wise, I think the human race, if we didn't have to strive and work and struggle, I think we would be much poorer off for it. I don't think having a goal of a utopia where we don't have to work and do things, not challenge ourselves, I don't think that's a good thing. I did see Wall-E. But like I said, this seems like a pretty interesting game, although I have to say, the one game I played from Freedom and Freeze was Black Friday, which was an economic game. I remember reviewing that, and I did not care for that game whatsoever. But that said, I have friends who love Power Grid. I honestly never played Power Grid. I have friends who just totally dig all of Freeze's designs. So maybe I just ran across something that wasn't too thrilling. Anyway, so that's coming in January. Now available from Monte Cook Games is the Numenera Player's Guide, and I've got a quick bit of dope. Create characters, explore the ninth world, and learn the basic rules of Numenera role-playing with this inexpensive player's guide. It's perfect for getting a taste of the game, having an extra reference on hand at the gaming table, and building new characters. The guide is an easy-to-access resource for anyone playing Numenera, and a wonderful introduction and teaching tool for the game. The Numenera Player's Guide includes all the basic game rules for this fast-paced, story-based tabletop role-playing game. An intuitive, concept-driven character generation system with scores of options for building just the character you imagine. An overview of the unique and wondrous Ninth World setting. Your gaming group will also need at least one copy of Numenera Discovery and Numenera Destiny to play, you guessed it, Numenera. But the Player's Guide is an inexpensive option for having a second set of rules handy at the gaming table. The 96-page softcover book is available now in print for $19.99, or as a PDF, which has actually been on DriveThruRPG, I think, for a little more than a month, and it is available for $7.99. I have to admit, I have not seen anything up close for the newest edition in Numenera. I did review the original core book, and I dug it. Personally, I think the setting is really, really interesting. One thing that I have to say with this player's guide, is it almost feels like, and maybe I'm wrong, but reading between the lines, it doesn't seem as if it's bringing anything really new to the game. It's just kind of collecting stuff from one of the core books, because it's talking about, well, it's having an inexpensive extra reference available. I don't know how crucial that would be. If you already had, say, the game in PDF, the 2 core books in PDF, why wouldn't you just share pages from the PDF with your players? Don't know. I can't say. All I will say is Numenera, the first one, was pretty cool. Really liked it. Gave it a good review. So I did want to share that this new player's guide for the new edition of Numenera is available. So it is Thursday. I love talking about RPGs. So the rest of the news today is focused on RPGs, because I always like to kind of get some RPG news out there. And I like to share news pieces that might not necessarily be on everybody's radar, because there is a massive new third-party adventure for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It has arrived. It's in PDF, and I've got the dope on Journey to Ragnarok. Journey to Ragnarok is an adventure and setting module for characters of 1st to 15th level, inspired by Norse myths and legends, compatible with 5th edition. It's a captivating adventure that will lead the heroes from Midgard through the 9 worlds. In an epic journey, the fate of men will be tied to that of the gods until the final moment, the Ragnarok. This book includes a setting guide to the 9 worlds, 6 clans fighting for supremacy over Midgard, 13 new and exclusive archetypes, a new class to discover, the Rune Master, 8 backgrounds inspired by Norse society, a rune divination system, descriptions and stat blocks of gods and mythological beasts, new and legendary magical items, as well as the aforementioned epic adventure for 1st to 15th level characters. This 336-page adventure is written by Michelle Paroli, taking a guess, sorry Michelle, and is available in PDF from DriveThruRPG for $19.90, not 99, 90 cents. I gotta say, this looks very cool. This was a very successful Kickstarter. The reason why I'm sharing DriveThruRPG's web address is because I did not find a company that Michelle Paroli is associated with. It just, in the credits on DriveThruRPG, it just gives Michelle's name, so I don't know. So I figured, hey, I want you folks to find it, so I did want to share the DriveThruRPG address, because that's where you can get it right now. And like I said, 336 pages, and it's Norse mythology, and it's for 1st to 15th level. There's gotta be a lot of excellent adventuring involved in this product. And as I mentioned before, this was a very, very successful Kickstarter. I want to say it funded in its first day. So pretty sweet. This is new. This has just arrived. I think it came out on DriveThru this week, if not just within the past couple of days. All right, my final news piece. I'm always on the lookout, save people money on games. Always on the lookout, saving folks money on RPGs, especially good RPGs. And a great location to find that is through Bundle of Holding. And there is a new Bundle of Holding that has arrived. And if you're a fan of Evil Hat's Fate system, then you're going to want to give this a peek. Here's the dope on the Bundle of Fate number 4. Adventurer. This Bundle of Fate 4 is our all-new 4th collection, thus the number 4, of tabletop role-playing games that use the popular Fate rule system. Like the previous installments in September 2013, November 2014, and November 2015, because they took a couple of years off, this wide-ranging offer, with games of classic and modern fantasy, space opera, alternate history, and monster bashing, is a low-priced, high-quality way to meet your fate. For just $8.95, you get all 9 titles in the starter collection with a retail value of $45.50 as DRM-free PDF ebooks. There's Bulldogs Fate Core Edition from Galileo Games, the newest version of the Rust Bucket space opera about troublemaking across the galaxy, which also includes the supplement Red Star, which is a retail value of $5, and the Bulldogs-inspired Fiasco playset, no references required. Isn't Bulldogs isn't it the ass-kicking, the game of, I think it's the game of kick-ass sci-fi, is how it's referred to. There's also The Small Folk. Phil Masters of Discworld RPG fame writes about the magical beings who live in the walls of your house. What? Walls of my house? Okay, now you're freaking me out. There's the Leaves of... Oh, I'm not going to be anywhere near correct pronouncing this. It is Chiaroscuro. Megan Burnett Burke's fantastic alternate renaissance of wonder and Machiavellian intrigue. There's 2 Fate Accelerated RPGs from Burin Kinsman at Dancing Lights Press. Starship Taiki for boldly going into the final frontier, and ready for it, get ready for it. You've seen the image pass by already. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Because, well, we don't have any good reason, but hey, Santa Claus. Oh, and like the 3 previous bundles of Fate, this one includes the Fate Core and Fate Accelerated rulebooks from Evil Hat Productions. If you pay more than the threshold price of $19.89, you'll level up and also get our entire bonus collection with 6 more titles worth an additional $56. So, grand total, about $100. They're a little over 100, I think 101. There's Kaiju Incorporated, the RPG from Evil Hat Productions. You've got a monster job to do in Rob Whelan's mayhem-filled game of giant creatures and equally destructive HR policies. Seems to have kind of a vibe like The Laundry, maybe, except with giant monsters. There's the Fate Adversary Toolkit, the indispensable guide to villains and obstacles for any Fate game. There's also Heart of the Fury, which actually seems really, really cool. It's from Galileo Games. It's a galaxy-sized Bulldogs campaign by Gareth Ryder Hanrahan. You know, it's good stuff. And then there's Elysium Flare, another take on Fate-based space opera by Brad Murray, co-designer of Diaspora. There's Shadowcraft the Glamour War, which is a magical super spy espionage in the Land of Fairy game, which also includes the Shadowcraft mission folio that generates unique new missions. By the way, Fate RPGs use fudge dice, available from Evil Hat Productions, as Fate dice is what they call them, or at hobby gaming stores, or from Amazon, or you can just use 6-sided dice. That's what I've done when I've run Fate stuff. Keep in mind, 10% of your payment, after payment gateway fees, will be donated to this offer's designated charity, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and you've got 18 days left to jump on board this bundle. I like Fate. I dig Fate. I think Fate is... okay, so I have a few smaller issues with Fate. One of them is character advancement. Just in the core rules themselves, I think that could use some work. But on a whole, I think Fate is excellent. I was a big fan of Fudge back in the day, and I'm not talking about the candy. I'm talking about the old RPG. In fact, this just shows you how old I am and how long I've been gaming. And I think I've mentioned this before when I've talked about Fate. Elliot Miller and I, my best friend Elliot from voiceofe.com, were at Gen Con back when I was up in Milwaukee, and we were in a playtest game of Fudge that was based on Watership Down, or Bunnies and Burrows, I guess we would say too. And had a blast. Really, really enjoyed it. So be sure to check out Bundle of Holding, because this is a pretty excellent bundle. There's some other bundles going on. There's 4 bundles currently going on. There's a couple other Shadow of the Demon Lord bundles that look pretty cool. So save some serious dough on some RPGs, some pretty cool stuff. Also want to float out there that right now on DriveThruRPG, you can pick up the Fate core rules as pay what you want. I'm not sure how long that has actually been going on, that you can just pay what you want, but you can get the core rules, which, honestly, if I remember right, clock in over 300 pages themselves for whatever you want to pay. I mean, if you want to pay $1, you can pay $1. You want to pay $5, pay $5. But if you are into role-playing games and you like to kind of kit bash a little bit, because in my opinion, I've talked about this many times when I'm talking about role-playing games, I've never run across a system that is 100% perfect. Never. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But Fate will give you some really good ideas. Really good ideas. While I'm speaking about DriveThruRPG and RPG PDFs, do want to mention, this may have started today, because I didn't notice these before. There's 2 new sales that are going on. One is Fat Goblin Games, who does a lot of 5th edition third-party adventures and things like that. Everything that they do is on sale at DriveThruRPG. They have a bundle right now. It's $750 worth of PDFs for less than $50. I think it's $49.95 off the top of my head. So I was like, wow, that is pretty sweet. And I have heard good things about Fat Goblin Games. Off the top of my head, I don't think I've run across any of their stuff, but I have heard good things. And I mean, come on, a $750 bundle for less than $50. That's awesome. You're saving like probably 93%, right? Then there's also the Dark Places and Demogorgon sale, or I think it's Dark Places and Demogorgons, plural, sale that's going on as well. That's another old school revival, old school Renaissance game. I am not familiar with it, but all of their stuff is on sale as well. So kind of cool. So keep your eyes peeled over at DriveThruRPG. As I always mention, the Gaming Gang is an affiliate of DriveThruRPG, so if you are planning on heading over there, please stop by thegaminggang.com. Before you do so, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase at any of the drive-thru sites, I get a small portion of that sale. And I say it all the time, those little tiny bits, those 25 cents, 50 cents, 10 cents, all adds up. And for the most part, pays for the web hosting for the Gaming Gang every month. And I always got to throw this out there. We don't have cheapo GoDaddy hosting either. Our hosting is $65 a month. So just floating that out there. I know it's $65 for hosting is probably, people are like, wow, that's not too much. And then other people are probably thinking, wow, that's crazy. That's insane. But for the bandwidth, for the amount of traffic that the Gaming Gang pulls in, I need to have that kind of hosting. So, all right, so got a few things going on before I jump into my page through and review of the Player's Handbook for 5th edition. Did have a giveaway from last week. I reviewed the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, showed it off, and I have a PDF copy to give out. And the winner of that contest, which was simply just be a subscriber on YouTube and comment on the video. That was pretty easy. Didn't get a lot of people jumping in on getting that. Don't know why. But Flaming Heron is the winner for the PDF of V5. I will actually try to touch base with them through YouTube. I don't know if I can send, I don't think I can send emails, but if I reply to that person, they do get notified. So I'll just say, hey, yeah, be sure to shoot me your email address, and I will get that PDF code out to you. Something else is, if you notice, down at the bottom, now I recently changed up the whole screen for the Daily Dope, because I used to have like a border, and it said, the Gaming Gang, Daily Dope, our Patreon page. Hey, check out our Patreon page one of these days, right? If you like the show, if you go to the Gaming Gang, if you watch the Daily Dope, by all means, check out the Patreon page. But I cleared up some real estate, right? So I got rid of the border and everything. But I do have my email address down in the bottom corner. So if you have a question or comment or just anything, you can reach out and touch base. So, because it used to be called the mailbag, I had mailbag at the gaming gang. So I was like, that's kind of silly. Why don't I just put my name there? So I did get a question from Alex in Roanoke, Virginia. And it was, what role-playing game have I run across over the years that I thought had the most interesting premise, but the worst mechanical execution? And I swear, I know I've mentioned this game before. I don't know if I've gotten into a whole lot of detail about it, but when I was a freshman in high school, so we're talking about 1981, there was a game called the Morrow Project. And you gotta remember, in the 80s, even into the 90s, there was a lot of fear of nuclear annihilation, right? We went through a long period recently where that was not really much of a concern for people. We weren't too concerned about the nukes flying and civilization kind of coming to an end, right? I think we're a little more concerned about it these days than we had in the past, decade or so. But that was a big thing in the 80s. So there were a lot of kind of post-apocalyptic role-playing games out there. There was Aftermath. Obviously, there was Gamma World, although Gamma World was a little more silly. At least the later editions, not necessarily the first edition that came out in, like, 79, something like that. But the Morrow Project, the whole premise of the game was that whoever Morrow, right? Somehow, and I think it might have been aliens. I mean, it had a really kind of oddball background premise. For some reason, he knew what was going to happen in the future, right? And he knew that the nukes were going to fly and civilization was going to effectively be wiped out. Not everybody would die, but pretty much the end of modern civilization. And so, knowing this, he created this project where he recruited, military members and scientists and things like that. And he knew how to cryogenically freeze these individuals, right? So he puts together these teams, these Morrow teams, Morrow Project teams, and each had kind of their own forte, right? Their own specialty. So a lot of times, most of the characters would portray like ex-military, not a lot of scientists and stuff like that. It was a lot of like kind of ex-military, and it was kind of like a little bit of like sort of futuristic combat and that, but not like way out there, right? It wasn't like, oh wow, everybody's got lasers and stuff like that. No, we had, the characters would all have like regular weapons. So anyway, so the premise is that everybody's going to be cryogenically frozen, and then these teams are going to reawaken like 10 years after the nuclear holocaust. I don't know why it's 10 years, because you'd have all that fallout still, but it's supposed to be like 10 years. Well, something goes wrong, and these teams aren't awakened for like 150 years, so everything's kind of moved on. So when these teams reawaken, it's 150 years after the apocalypse, and now they're supposed to be trying to rebuild society. That's what their game plan is. So it was actually a really cool premise, really cool setup. The rules for combat, especially, firearms and things like that, armor penetration, all these different things, was just amazing. And it wasn't super, super crunchy. It was a little crunch, but the most difficult thing was when you, if say a gun wasn't modeled in the game. You could model that game. There were formulas that you could use to actually create that weapon in the game, right? All of this stuff. The combat system was pretty good. It was very, very deadly. One gunshot wound, and a lot of characters, depending on where they got hit, that was it. So really, really cool. The rest of it was just a disaster because there were no skills, anything like that. It was the game itself. The original game was more just the combat aspect of things, and then it was kind of like everything else was sort of like, figure it out. Go ahead, figure it out yourselves, which stunk. And they even had paid Chaosium to allow them to use, basic role-playing system now, the D100. to create some skills and things like that. Even that wasn't all that great. There is a 4th edition of the Morrow Project floating around out there. And I think it's been out there for a few years. Not a long time, but for a few years. I have never taken a peek at it. But anybody out there, because I know there's a lot of people, I hear people ask me, well, I should say, I've had people ask me a few times, hey, what kind of role-playing game do you recommend if I want to do something like Fallout? I was kind of like, well, I wouldn't say Gamma World. Morrow Project kind of fits that. Unfortunately, the original Morrow Project, like I said, the mechanics to it were just, outside of combat, were pretty bad. But, like I said, there's a 4th edition. Then there's a website out there that has been around for a long time. I might even go track it down and put a link to it in the show notes, where these people got together and they just plotted out, like everywhere in the U.S., what would be going on during this period when these Morrow Project teams were awakening. And I remember looking at Illinois and like the Chicago area, and they had like all this stuff. And it was like, you could go, I mean, you know, depending on where you live, especially in the United States, right? You could just look it up and be like, holy cow. It was like they had like local people all adding to the flavor to this website for all these locations. I will track it down. I think it's still around. It was about a year ago. I think I took a peek at it again and was like, man, they put a lot of effort into this. So, Alex in Roanoke, I guess I would have to say the role-playing game that really sticks out in my mind as having the most interesting premise, but really crappy execution as far as the game systems itself, would be the Morrow Project. All right, so I know folks are tuning in because they want to check out the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeon Draggers. I need a sip here. See, that's what happens. I keep talking down here. It's kind of dry in the Duct Tape Studios. And then I just get tongue-tied. Anyway, I'm sure folks are tuning in to see what my thoughts are on the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. It is 320 pages, carries an MSRP of $49.95. It's a hardcover, lead designed by Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford. I usually share like the artist credits. There are just so many of them in this book. So I am not going to go through all of those at the moment, but what we're going to do is we are going to move over to the other camera. Got some other stuff set up. Before the show ends, I will talk about a change in the schedule for the Daily Dope that's coming up about a week and a half. And also talk about what's coming up tomorrow and through most of next week on the show too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop on ye old reading specs. So this is the Player's Handbook. And okay, so I started off the show by saying I'm sure there are people out there who are going to be wondering, why in the world am I going to sit here and do a review for a Player's Handbook for a role-playing game that came out 4 years ago? Because this 5th edition came out at Gen Con in, I want to say it's got to be 2014. It's got to be 2014, because I do know for a fact that I did my starter box video review quite a long time ago, because it has been quite some time since I lived outside South Bend, Indiana. The reason why I want to mention this, that I'm doing the review, is first off, I already pointed out, I love showing off books. I love paging through books, kind of just, you know, casually chatting about what I like, what I may have some issues with or have a critique about as I go through them. The other reason is that there are a lot of people out there who are looking to get into role-playing games now. And this is always the case, right? So it's always a good time to do reviews for games that maybe they've been around for a while, maybe I haven't done a review of, but it's going to be new to somebody. And I'll give you a great example. Cameron, my nephew, who's part of the gang, one of his friends, Daniel, is, you know, really into fantasy, and he's, you know, when I've run role-playing games and that for the gang, he's always there, and he's always talking about running Dungeons and Dragons, and what's my advice, and blah blah blah, and this and that. What books does he pick up, so on and so forth. So of course I told him you got to have a player's handbook. So I do want to mention also that even though it carries an MSRP of, it's kind of weird. It's been a while since I cracked this puppy open. Even though it does carry an MSRP of $49.95, you can get the player's handbook online through a variety of locations for as low as, I've seen it brand new for as low as $24. I have seen the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and the Monster Manual all together brand new for around $80-ish, $85 or so. So it is not really, really costly to get on board in this role-playing game. The one thing that I always have felt is in 5e's favor over Pathfinder, at least wallet-wise, is that Wizards of the Coast does not release something new for Dungeons & Dragons constantly. Now, there are people who play Pathfinder who, they're running a weekly game or twice a week, something like that. They need a lot of content coming out. So I'm not knocking Paizo for releasing something brand new, at least one item, especially Adventure Paths, for Pathfinder every month. But it does become much more pricey to be a fan of Pathfinder than it is for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. All right, so we've got the credits here. As I mentioned, tons and tons of illustrators throughout the book that were utilized for the artwork in this book. So we've got the contents, we've got the introduction, we've got the preface. A few things I should point out personally about Dungeons & Dragons. I was never hugely into D&D. I was into Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. One of the first gaming products I ever picked up happened to have been the G1, what is it? Steading of the Hill Giants? I think that's the title of it. I bought it, looked at it, I went, oh, hey, this looks cool. And I got it, and then it turned out, oh, I didn't realize I had to have all these other books, which I eventually went and got. But I remember picking that up. That was my first taste of Dungeons & Dragons. So I did play a little bit of D&D back in the day. But once I got into Call of Cthulhu, we pretty much got away from a lot of the fantasy role-playing games. Elliot ran some Stormbringer, which is based on Michael Moorcock's Elric series. We had other friends who were running like World War II and Top Secret, some James Bond, which I still think James Bond from Victory Games is excellent. I think that's an excellent system. Somebody should resurrect that system. Even if they I'm sure wouldn't be able to get the James Bond name anymore. It was still a really, really good system. So, jumping in. So I want to point out that I am not completely well-versed in every single version of Dungeons & Dragons. 2nd edition, I don't recall seeing anything for. 3rd edition, not really. Maybe a little bit of 3.5. I do recall taking a look through the 4th edition core books, and I wasn't super keen on it. But with the 5th edition, one of the things that I think really stands out to me is that there's been a lot of things that were streamlined for the 5th edition. Now, some people love a lot of crunch, a lot of math in their role-playing games. That's fine. I get it. I'm not one of them. I did not grow up as somebody who was into Monty Hall kind of games, which you gotta be pretty far back to know what that actually means as far as role-playing games. I was always in the story. It was always about the story. I think that's one of the reasons why Call of Cthulhu really struck a note with me, even when I picked it up and knew nothing about H.P. Lovecraft's stories, was that really the whole premise of a Call of Cthulhu adventure is the tale, the story. Your characters, yes, your characters are important, but a Lovecraftian story, most of us already know what's going to happen with the protagonist, right? Either going to end up dead or in an asylum someplace. So I was always a big story fan. And I even mention this whenever I do reviews for role-playing games. I don't get hung up on mechanics, because any mechanics that I don't care for, I'm just going to toss out, or I'm going to kit bash something that I feel works for me. Which, that's like the golden rule of role-playing games, right? It's your game. Make it what you will. Anyway, so we're going through the first portion of this is talking about character creation. Talking about the different races. I know the term race isn't really, I almost said kosher, which that's not kosher saying that. Utilizing the term races is kind of frowned upon now. I know a lot of companies are, talking about cultures or what's the other term? Species, I think some companies are using. So we're talking about the different non-human species, cultures. We got the dwarves, we got the elves, we got different kinds of elves, different kind of dwarves, we got the halflings, we got the humans, the variety of the different humans. One thing that caught my eye with when I first was reading through the new 5th edition books back in the day, because I actually read these when they came out, one of the things that really struck me was a lot of the diversity that we see throughout the book. And not necessarily, I'm not talking about just skin color diversity. I'm talking about actual like equipment and clothing and things like that. I really, really dug that. I know there are people out there who are like, oh, I hate 5th edition. It's too much of the social justice warrior going on and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't get that, I think most people realize through the years that I've been doing the gaming gang and, the time I've been in front of the camera talking about games and things like that, that I don't buy in any of that kind of stuff, right? It's sort of like, I was around in this hobby when you would go up to Milwaukee for Gen Con and it was just a bunch of white guys hanging around. And that was it. And you know what? That was not necessarily good for our hobby whatsoever. So the way I look at it, the more people we get from all different backgrounds, all walks of life, all sexual orientations, what have you, the better our hobbies are. Now, if you're threatened by that, well, I'm sorry. I'm old school, but I'm not crazy old school like that. That's not the kind of old school I am. I'm old school just simply because I've been playing these games for a long, long time. All right, so we got the half-elf. You know what? I don't necessarily like that image. That image just strikes me as kind of odd. I don't know. It's kind of strange. I do like the artwork throughout. In my opinion, though, I think as the releases have come out from Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons, I think I like the artwork better. I think they've tightened the artwork up a bit. One of the aspects of Pathfinder I'm not a huge fan of is the sort of cartoonish / anime inspiration to some of the artwork. Like everybody's got these huge swords. They got these massive swords that, it's like, okay, that's like straight out of Final Fantasy, which is fine when you're playing Final Fantasy. If I'm playing what's supposed to be a somewhatly realistic-ish kind of game, fantasy game, I expect the characters to carry weapons around that, yes, they could actually lift, let alone actually swing around and fight for more than 10 seconds with. But I like the artwork, but like I said, I do think the artwork has actually solidified quite a bit as the Wizards of the Coast products have come out. So we got the tieflings. So basically, we're getting a lot of the background about the different cultures and the different sorts of characters that you're going to come up with. What are kind of, what's best suited for what culture or species. One of the things that I really do like about the new 5th edition. There is not the, I should say new, let's just say 5th edition. There isn't the buttonholing or pigeonholing certain character species or cultures into specific character classes. Where we used to see that a whole bunch. We would see the whole, well, no, you know what? If you're a half elf, then you can be this, 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 but you can't be that, you can't be this, can't be. Pretty much thrown all that out the window. Another aspect, too, is that wizards, magic users aren't just locked in to only using a quarterstaff or a dagger and things along those lines, because you've got your proficiencies. And another aspect of the game, too, is as you level up, your proficiencies increase. And your proficiencies are basically a bonus on your 20-sided die roll. So you add it to your 20-sided die roll. And what'll happen is that it's pretty much kind of across the board. So if you have a proficiency of +3 as an example, you get that +3 to your attacking, you get that +3 to your saving throws, you get the +3 to various different skill rolls. So I like that. I like that a lot, that you've got the proficiencies. They don't ramp up real quickly. So even at 20th level, you're still only a +6. So some folks may not like the fact that it takes you a bit longer to like really get a lot of the bonuses to your die rolls. But I appreciated it because then you don't have that weird power creep that always kind of comes into the game, into a lot of role-playing games. And one of the aspects is that I kind of look at is, especially with monsters. So with monsters, typically what would have happened in, well, I'll use Dungeons and Dragons as an example. So at first level, fighting a few kobolds, that could kill your character off, that's a challenge. That combat is going to be a challenge. Well, once you get to 5th, 6th level, it's like, this is nothing. There's 20 kobolds. Ha! I'll just cut a path right through them. In this respect, in 5th edition, with the way the proficiencies work, that's not necessarily the case. So you, as a dungeon master, you get to utilize various different monsters a longer time as the characters are going through their various different levels, as they're leveling up. So it isn't, whereas if you're kind of trying to come up with something on the fly to run, where you're sitting there with the monster manual, and this happens, I'm not joking, this does happen, where somebody's creating something and they're like, oh, okay, well, so the characters are 7th level, let me start flipping through these charts here to see what are the appropriate monsters I can throw in their path, even though there's really no continuity to the story for throwing those monsters out there. So whereas with the rules in 5th edition, you'll see that you can continue to have less powerful monsters, but in greater numbers, still be a challenge for higher level characters. Rolling up characters pretty quick. You can roll up characters if they're not magic users, is what I was finding. You can pretty much roll up your characters within about a half hour. One of the other aspects that I do like about the characters in 5th edition is every time you gain a level, something's going on. Your character is becoming cooler. Whereas I remember back in the day where you would have levels that, say for an example, it was like the odd number levels or even number levels, where it was kind of like, so I got some more hit points, that's it? That's all I got? Ugh. So I got to go another level before I get to, and it's funny too, is that is actually carried over into a lot of computer role-playing games as well. So a lot of times you're playing a computer role-playing game and you're sitting there and you're like, all right, so I got to this level. Oh crap! All I get is extra like hit points. I don't get the cool stuff. I don't get to unlock something new. until my next level, at least here, every level something's going on. Every level you're getting, you know, your proficiency's going up. You're unlocking new spells, or you're unlocking new abilities if you're a non-magic user. So I do like that a lot. I do think that's very cool. So there are various different characters. There's a lot of detail as far as the different character classes, more than I ever remember in past D&D that I was familiar with. So, for an example, we've got the fighter. So you create a fighter. You know, back in the day, it was just, okay, well, you're a fighter. Now, granted, I understand these subclasses have been around for a long time. I pointed out, but I am not necessarily the most well-versed D&D person to talk to. If you want, we can talk Call of Cthulhu, and we can discuss the differences between different editions. But the thing that I do like is that you do have the different subclasses. You do have the ability to custom craft your characters a bit to the point where it's not just, oh, they're a fighter. We've got, for an example, we've got the Eldritch Knight. Once again, something else that I like that's cool in 5th edition is if you're not a magic user, a magic using class, you still have an ability. Most of these classes will have a path for you to take where you could have some ability to learn some magic spells. So I did dig that quite a bit. So I enjoy that a lot because, once again, unfortunately, this is kind of the thing with all fantasy role-playing games that I'm familiar with. Probably shouldn't make a blanket statement of all, but I should say a vast majority of fantasy role-playing games that I have been familiar with is that as the characters go up in level or go up in experience, the magic users become way more overpowered than they probably should be. So, you know, because there's only so much like a fighting, a martial character is going to be able to do. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of like the, I shouldn't say kind of, I do like the fact that some of the classes do give the characters abilities to pick up some magic throughout. So, as I said, lots of detail, a lot of information about each of the character classes. So, like, for an example, we got the Ranger. It's talking about class features, different fighting style, favorite enemies, spell casting. Once again, spell casting, although Rangers have always had some spell usage. So, we got the Rogue. Oh, okay, so here's something else that I think is kind of cool, too, which never made much sense, right? So if your characters did not have a thief in your group, what, nobody can spot traps? Nobody can unlock, a lock because you don't have a thief? So you can't spot any traps because you don't have eyes? What the hell's going on with that? That has changed in 5th edition. And the way it kind of balances out is that, of course, a rogue, thief, whatever, what have you, they have the proficiency in a thieves toolkit. So they get to add their proficiency. So, of course, obviously, they're going to be much better at unlocking a lock or disarming traps and things like that than any other character would. But at least there is the ability there, even though, might not be great. Probably have a better chance of setting off the trap than disarming it. But there is the ability that other characters can pick up on. So I like that. And that kind of falls into the whole theme of that you're kind of, you're customizing these characters more so than you may have been able to in the past. There are, well, as far as the standard rules go, there are no longer feats. Feats are considered an optional rule in 5th edition. I don't know. I got to be honest. I don't really have a dog in the fight as far as liking or disliking feats. I know some people really like feats. I know some people really dislike feats. One thing that it did seem to me, as far as in the player's handbook, that at least they've kind of left feats in, they're cool feats. They're not totally lame feats. So they would be things that you would want to have, as opposed to, well, I got to get this. I got to take this feat so I can get that next feat. You know, really not sort of a, well, we've got all these different prerequisites you got to take before you get to do something cool. There's also the backgrounds. I like the backgrounds. And then on the other hand, I don't think there are enough backgrounds, is sort of how I look at it. Now, I do know that there are other releases from Wizards of the Coast that have more background options. A lot of the adventure books that have come out have had more backgrounds and things like that. So that's cool. And basically what the backgrounds kind of do is they give characters like more skills, more abilities. Once again, another way to custom craft your character. As far as min-maxing, you don't see that the same sort of min-maxing in 5th edition as you probably did in past editions. You're not sitting there going, okay, well, how do I make sure that I get to maximize this and that, blah, blah, blah. To me, 5th edition is once again more focused towards telling the stories. The rules are more streamlined. The rules are much more, in my opinion, at least, much easier for new players to get on board with, as opposed to having to memorize just, tons of stuff in books just to be a player. I don't see 5th edition actually being like that. As a dungeon master, once again, I think the streamlining of the rules are good for dungeon masters. I have to laugh because one of my running gags is always talking about grappling rules, because I always thought, shouldn't you just have sort of like hand-to-hand combat, unarmed combat, and you can have various different aspects of it if you really wanted to do a whole grappling thing? Do we really need to go through a whole plethora of rules to handle grappling that is almost never coming up? There are grappling rules, but thankfully, that once again, something else that's been streamlined. So we got the different equipment, we got different weapons. So I was kind of surprised. So we've got, here's an example here. So we're talking about different weapons, right? So then we see these various different weapons on the pages, yet it doesn't tell you what anything is. So yes, of course, right, I get it. That's a battle axe, that's a battle hammer, that's a mace. That looks like a maul. Okay, but what's that, right? So, is that a rapier? I assume, because of the handguard. But, as a rapier, that blade is too thick. That blade should be thinner. That looks like that's probably a short sword. That looks like just a regular sword. Don't know. See, it would have been cool if they had said, oh, well, this is this. There are fantasy role-playing games out there where I thought they've done a really, really good job of showing off all the various different weapons and things like that. I remember as a kid, I had no idea what the difference between a flail and a morning star was. I had absolutely no clue. I thought they were kind of the same thing, which they are kind of the same thing, but there is a difference. So we've got mounts and vehicles, tools, trade goods, food, drink, and lodging. One thing that I think really should be reworked with just about every fantasy role-playing game that uses a variety of different coinage is, come on, really? Do we really have to break it down into copper piece, silver piece, electum piece, or what is it? Yeah, is it electum? I don't know. Gold piece. Then we got platinum. And then we, bars of stuff. It's like, come on, do we really need to get that detailed? I could see if we go copper, silver, gold. That's good, right? That should be okay. Even if we just went with gold or silver and gold. So there we got some more customizing options. So we got the multi-classing. Multi-class. I always thought multi-class was pretty cool. Now remember, we're going back in the day. I thought multi-classing was pretty cool. It was just kind of a pain It was a little kind of difficult. Plus, once you got a high enough level, once again, you got way too much power creep coming in with the characters that were multi-classed. I remember it got to the point where you would be reading like a polished adventure, and it seemed like everybody in this adventure was multi-classed. Now, I don't want to say that multi-class has been like defanged. It just has been brought a little more back to the pack. So you can have a multi-class character. It's just you're not going to, overwhelm other characters who are just single class. So I like that. I like that a lot. Then we got playing the game. Using ability scores. So we still have skills. We don't have tons and tons of skills. One of the things that, and of course this is coming from somebody who's always been a big fan of Call of Cthulhu, always was a big fan of RuneQuest, basic role-playing from Chaosium. I would like to see more skills in D&D. I'm sure that puts me in the minority, but I do think that D&D could have... I'm not saying that it should be like a Chaosium game where you have all these skills and things like that. I just think that, for an example, so like skills, we got athletics under strength, dexterity, acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, intelligence, arcana, history, investigation, nature, religion. I think skill-wise, this should kind of, like, for an example, like strength. Yeah, I get where you would have a strength check. So you don't necessarily have to have tons and tons of strength skills, but they should kind of even it out a little bit more for each of the attributes. So maybe there's like 4 skills for strength, 4 skills for dexterity, 4 skills for wisdom. It doesn't break out that way. So for an example, if you were somebody who was going to be more focused as a fighting character, you're going to have fewer skills than someone who is not, because there are more skills that are geared towards intelligence, wisdom, and so forth. Then we talk about adventuring, time. I don't understand how anyone can run a game that's going to be... How you can run a role-playing game that is going to... should we say model reality? Or maybe... Okay, so maybe I should say I don't understand how someone can run a role-playing game that has real risk, has real gravitas to it, if you don't actually take care, don't track time. I'm not saying you got to track every second. I'm not even a huge fan necessarily of combat rounds, but you do have to track time in your game. And I know there are some dungeon masters, game masters, what have you out there who are like, I don't care about time. You should, because it creates, not every adventure is going to have some sort of like countdown clock going on, and I don't mean that. But, if your characters are in a dungeon and they haven't brought enough supplies with, they should have to pay the price for not having prepared to go into the dungeon with enough provisions and equipment, as opposed to, it doesn't really matter. Talk about movements, the environments, social interactions. A few other things that I think are pretty cool with the 5th edition is the magic system still is Vancian, but it's not necessarily where, okay, well, you memorize one spell, you cast it, and it's gone forever. You're using slots. Another aspect of it is that first level, or lower level spells can become much more powerful based upon where you would slot it, if you slot it into a higher level. So you don't have to sit there and have all these various different levels of the same spell in the book itself. So I like that. Of course, you still have the cantrips that are cool too. One aspect that I always got kind of laughed at with D&D back in the old days was, you had your lower level magic users and stuff, and it'd be like, okay, well, I've cast this spell. I can't do anything else anymore. I guess I'll be sitting here with my dagger, waiting to lose my 2 hit points and die. That's not necessarily the case. Of course, with Dungeons and Dragons over the years, it has gotten to the point where beginning characters aren't just these country bumpkins who can't walk and chew gum at the same time. First level characters are actually real adventurers. I mean, they would be, you know, the heroes in a series of fantasy novels just starting off, where they're actually better than just the average Jane or Joe on the street. Whereas back in the old days, it was sort of like, first level? You're a first level wizard? Oh, okay, well, you have 1 hit point. Better not trip, better not sneeze too hard, or you'll be dead. So I like the fact of that. That is not something that I think is new to 5th edition. I think that's been around for a while. As far as the actual mechanics of the game, they've been really, once again, I'm going to use that term, streamlined, because effectively, rather than having to sit there and calculate all these bonuses and penalties and things like that, you can basically have advantage or disadvantage. So the vast majority of the time, you're just going to be rolling your 20-sided die, and you're looking for a high roll. You're going to add, excuse me, you're going to add your proficiency. Normally, you might have a bonus to the roll as well. But what'll happen is sometimes you'll have advantage, so you get to roll 2 dice, and you keep the higher of the 2 rolls. Sometimes you might have disadvantage, so you're rolling 2 dice, but you're keeping the lower of the 2 rolls. So I like how that's kind of taken away a lot of the busy work, a lot of the mathematics that dungeon masters would have to mess around with a lot. It does speed up combat quite a bit. Combat is pretty fluid as far as 5th edition. It's not going to be as tactically precise, I guess I'll say, as when I remember 4th edition. Remember, 4th edition was a lot more... now, I don't want to say it was a lot more flavor to the combat. There was just a lot more tactics to the combat. And but saying that, you might have play a combat in an adventure, and it took an hour, 2 hours just to resolve that combat. Personally, that is not what I'm looking for in a role-playing game. If I want that kind of thing, I'll go out there and I'll go pick up some skirmish rules for a miniatures game, and then I can get as detailed combat as I can possibly get. I don't necessarily need that in a role-playing game. So I like the advantage, I like the disadvantage. I like how a lot of the math has been kind of taken out of the equation. Then we got the spell casting, as I was talking about. You got the spell slots. Known and prepared spells, so you prepare your spells. Casting, various different casting. One thing that's always kind of thrown me off as far as Magic and D&D, and I get it, I understand what they're talking about, is okay, so does it have what kind of elements to the spell, right? Does it have physical components that you need? Do you need to make some sort of hand movements? Do you have to say something? I get that. I dig that it's there. To me, I think that's just a little too detailed, a little more detailed than I need it to personally be. Just like for an example here, it's explaining, okay, so spells that are in a line, or a cone, or a cube, or a sphere, or a cylinder. Yeah, I understand why it's there. Sometimes it just, to me, it seems like, okay, it's a little more busy work than I need. So we've got the different spells. So you got the different cantrips. And the cool thing is that you see the cantrips with a lot of the characters, not just wizards. Although if I remember right, I don't think there's cantrips for the ranger. So then we're going through all the various different spells. If I remember correctly, back in the old days, they used to divide the spells up by level in the book. Now they're just alphabetical. So we've got all the different spells. Let's kind of zip through these. The actual production quality of the book is really nice. It's got nice paper stock. Granted, it's not up there in, say, the Ulysses kind of range. Once again, you don't have nice handy dandy little bookmarks or anything like that. But still, I think it's really nicely done. even as a $50 book, I think this is a solid book. Very, very solid book compared to some role-playing titles that are out there as far as core books go. And as I mentioned, I've seen this as low as about $24 new online. So I think for 24 bucks, especially if you're just getting into Dungeons and Dragons, I think that's a steal. It really is. Considering that you can't get a D&D adventure from Wizards of the Coast for 25 bucks as a hardcover. All right, so got all the different spells here. I should take a look. I'm sure it's gone. Funny side note story. I went to high school with Michael, is his last name Nistel, who was really, really well known in the role-playing industry. I think he still is. I think he's still publishing stuff. There were a couple of D&D spells that actually had his name, Nistel's, whatever. So I went to high school with him, and he was the president of the opposing gaming club at my high school. So if I remember correctly, he was the president of the Dungeon Masters Guild. I think that's what it was called. And I was president. Well, not when I think he was like a year ahead of me. Maybe, yeah, I think he was a year ahead of me in high school. But at one point, I was president of the Gamers Guild, and he was president of the Dungeon Masters Guild. So I think that's funny that I actually went to high school with someone who became a pretty big name as far as role-playing games, at least back in the day. In fact, so much so that he had some spells named after him in Dungeons & Dragons. And I think it's funny, too, because he used to always wear a Doctor Who scarf, a Tom Baker Doctor Who scarf all the time. All right, so I've got more of the spells. So a lot of spells in here, which is great. I really appreciate that because a lot of times with some role-playing games, they'll just give you enough spells that kind of get you, kind of dip your toes into magic and stuff like that. Now we've got tons and tons of spells in here. Then we've got talking about conditions. It's kind of funny. I like how it's like, oh, okay, so I'm charmed. Yeah. I'm petrified, and my arm fell off. Gods of the Multiverse. I never have gotten really super into kind of like the backstory, the setting story for D&D, because there's been so many of them over the years, right? We had Greyhawk, we had Forgotten Realms, then we had Dragonlance. We've had a lot. Planes of Existence. Talking about that. Creature Statistics. So we get a few monsters in that here, but more of this. This is more along the lines of just more day-to-day kind of creatures, or non-magical creatures, I guess we'll say. Then we finish up with some inspirational reading. There you go, a little Michael Moorcock, excellent stuff. All right, so here's the funny thing. If you're not super well versed in Dungeons & Dragons, you may not know this, and I'm sure it's in here. Yep, J.R.R. Tolkien. Gary Gygax couldn't stand The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Just did not, and he used to just get really ticked off when Dungeons & Dragons was mentioned, especially usually in the press, newspaper articles, stuff like that, was always mentioned in the same breath as Tolkien, and how it was inspired by The Lord of the Rings and that. And he was like, no, I hate The Lord of the Rings. Gygax was more a fan of like Robert E. Howard, the Conan stories, and Jack Vance's Dying Earth stories. That's why this has Vancian magic. I mean, that's really where Vancian magic comes from. The whole terminology of Vancian magic comes from the Dying Earth stories. So I find it funny that it's like, oh, Lord of the Rings, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, no, no, no. So anyway, that is the Player's Handbook for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot I really like. There's a lot I really, really like about 5th edition. And like any role-playing game, I know there are people out there who hate it. They're like, oh, can't stand Dungeons and Dragons. It's like when I was doing my review for the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade. There are people out there, doesn't matter the quality of the title, how well the system is put together, the mechanics and mechanically things like that. Doesn't matter what it's ever going to be, they hate it. It's like, you know, Electronic Arts, right? EA. Some people just hate that company, and there's reasons why. So we're not, I'm not going out on a limb by saying people are, oh well, I don't understand why they hate EA. But there are people out there, it doesn't matter. If it's Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, they are vehemently against it. And to me, it doesn't make any sense because there's so much goodness in a lot of the various different role-playing games that you can cherry pick and put into, the system of your choice. Or if you want to, you can kind of concoct your own house rules for games as well. But I really like 5th edition. I have since the beginner box came out, the starter box came out. I think Wizards of the Coast did a really nice job. I did not care so much for 4th edition when I read through the core books for that, simply because it just struck me as just being more focused on just, way too many dice rolls for things, in my opinion. And more towards like tactical combat as opposed to telling a story. Whereas 5th edition has kind of come back towards, hey, we want to tell a story here. Yeah, we've got these other mechanics in the game for you to, for fighting and stuff like that. But let's not spend 3 hours of a 4-hour game session with the player characters fighting a bunch of orcs, right? And through just like one set piece battle. We are actually, if you've taken a look at the playtest for Pathfinder, Pathfinder's kind of shifting away from the, because it's like, people consider it like D&D 3.75, right? It's kind of shifting away from that to more towards, the storytelling aspects. So as far as the Player's Handbook, I most certainly do recommend it for people who are brand new to role-playing games. If you want to play a fantasy role-playing game, I gotta say, 5th edition is still probably numero uno, maybe top 2 games you can jump into. Easy to understand, easy to get your hooks into. And the core books, the 3 core books are excellent. I am actually next week going to look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, kind of talk about that. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I gave the Player's Handbook a very, very solid 9 out of 10. There isn't much that I dislike about 5th edition. Like the earlier art wasn't a big fan of. It's good, it's okay, but I like the artwork more in the later products that have come out. And but as far as the Player's Handbook, I think it's got really everything that players really need and more so. I think they went a little overkill on providing the players information in the 320 pages. All right, once again, the 5th edition Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons is available now. It is 320 pages, and it carries an MSRP of $49.95, and I give it a 9 out of 10. So, before I go, what's going on with future episodes, right? So, the first thing I do want to point out is the time of the Daily Dope is going to change. So it's not going to change next week, but the week after that is going to, and I'm probably looking at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And that is because finally I am going to be going and doing my cardiovascular rehab. I only had the heart attack back in March. So finally going off to do that, and that's going to start on the 16th. So it's 3 days a week for about an hour and a half a day. So it's going to be in the afternoon, so of course it would fall right when I'm doing the Daily Dope. So I'm going to move the Daily Dope tonight, which is fine. I mean, that's cool. I'm figuring like 7 o'clock. That way we're looking at even the longer shows go till like 8:30. So that's that. All right, so on tomorrow's show, I'm going to unbox and take a look to see what we've got in the latest release for Ascension from Ultra Pro Entertainment and Stoneblade Entertainment. This is the Delirium release, so it's got some good heft to that. Then on Monday, I will be taking a first look at Marvel Codenames, which my best friend Elliot Miller gave me for my birthday. So I was like, "What? You're buying me a game? What are you crazy?" So this was like a big hit at Origins this year. So I'm kind of looking forward to checking this out. Plus, I'm a Marvel fan, Marvel Comics too, not just the movies. So that's going to be on Monday's show. On Tuesday's show, I got to reach down here and grab it. I'm going to review Betrayal Legacy from Avalon Hill. Yes, I did the unboxing and took a look through this last week. So I still got to play a little bit this weekend. I need to play some more adventures of it before I'm ready to do my review. Wednesday's show, I will be unboxing and taking a first look at A Distant Plane. Yes, it's another reprint of the Coin series from GMT Games. So this is the second edition of A Distant Plane. So we're going to take a look at that. Then on Thursday, more RPG fun. I'm going to take a look at the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Give it a review as well. Over the weekend, I'm probably going to shoot a little standalone video for the Fountain of Youth and other adventures for one of my favorite games. I really enjoy The Lost Expedition from Osprey Games. Okay, so as I like to always say, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. Come on, by now you know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. I will be back tomorrow, which is Friday, TGIF. So until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Thanks again for watching The Daily Dope, presented by The Gaming Gang. If you like this episode, be sure to give it a quick thumbs up. And if you dig the channel, please subscribe. If you'd like to check out our previous episode, click right here. And if you want to check out a somewhat randomly selected episode, give a click right down here. It'll be like opening a box of Cracker Jacks. You just don't know what you'll get. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'm Jeff McAleer.